Good day, and thank you all for joining us on Black Agenda Report. I'm very pleased to welcome Richard Medhurst to our YouTube channel. He's an independent journalist who has himself been subjected to state censorship, actually more than that. He's actually been charged under the UK's Terrorism Act in 2014, charged with expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization, unquote, and detained. We spoke to him about that. He was later charged by Austria and detained. And I think these attacks are proof of his good work. And we're going to talk about a recent reporting that he's done. He joins us to talk about his latest investigative report on his YouTube channel, the Petrogas-Dollar, the secret U.S. strategy behind the Iran war, and a report on his Substack entitled How the U.S. Pulled Off an Armed Robbery of the World's Energy Supply and Created the Petrogas-Dollar. And you will see those links in the program description. We were very happy to reprint his report in Black Agenda Report, and I realized it was important to speak to him directly. Thank you so much for joining me, Richard.
Thank you for having me, Margaret, and thank you for the grand intro as well.
You deserve it. I think this work is important for obvious reasons, but I also think there's a misunderstanding, even among anti-imperialists, of what these U.S. maneuvers have done and how successful they've been. I've long felt that describing the U.S. as being in decline is both untrue and a mistaken analysis. So I was very pleased to see someone provide this great reporting. Tell us what prompted you to make all these connections.
Well, it started with the Venezuela anti-narcotics thing. It's something, people would talk about Trump and Greenland or Trump and Venezuela, and no one would really explain what was going on. Even the anti-narcotics thing was kind of just out of nowhere. And, they were very callous and brazen in posting even videos of these crimes on the official government Twitter. And they still are, by the way, Twitter accounts. So, I couldn't figure out what was going on. And so they had just kidnapped Maduro. And then that exact same fleet that was in the Caribbean, suddenly they sent the same ships all the way up to the Arctic. So this is they call it the High North / North Atlantic because it's in a key strategic area, which I'll come back to. It's called the GIUK corridor, and it means Greenland, Iceland, UK corridor. And they pirated a Russian tanker there called Bella 1, or that was at least one of its old names. But they just straight up pirated it. And again, they posted a video of it, very proud. And so I was like, oh, well, obviously Venezuela had something to do with oil. And now they're taking Russian oil in the Arctic. This is all about oil. So it became clear to me. And then I started pulling at this thread. It became clear to me as time went on and the Iran war began that actually there were 3 operations going on. It's not just Operation Epic Fury, which is the Iran war. It's also Arctic Sentry, which started 2 weeks before Iran. And that one is focused on Russia and China. And you can even go on NATO's website, and they explicitly say that it's about China's access to minerals and energy. I mean, they're not really trying to hide it. They're quite proud of it, actually. And then I came across, while investigating, an Arctic security brief, not from NATO, but from the UK. And that's where they mentioned the GI-UK gap. And then I was like, oh my God, this is why he wants Greenland. It's so obvious. And then I came across a video of Trump saying explicitly there are too many Russian and Chinese ships in the Arctic. And then it's very, very clear what's going on. This is about, imposing an embargo of sorts. And then even in the UK security brief, they mentioned the future trade routes that don't even exist yet because the ice hasn't melted. One of them is called the Transpolar Sea Route, or TSR. So that one is basically being blockaded already right now in anticipation by NATO along with the US. So it's the UK and 13 other NATO navies, including Spain, France, Sweden. You can go and see them pulling aside, and they call this verification. It's really just piracy. They're basically pirating Russian tankers. So the French will take one tanker here, then Sweden will do another there, and it adds up. And And then you started having these drone attacks on Russian energy. And I went and I was curious, like, has this ever happened before during the 4 years of the Ukraine war? Like, is it something new? And yeah, sure enough, it was, I started counting them and looking at them like literally on a map. And you could see a tanker being pirated by the US in the Indian Ocean. And then there was one that struck in the Arctic. And then that other one by the UK and the US pirated in the North Atlantic. And then one off the coast of Senegal. And then I was like, okay, this is very, very obviously a connected, concerted effort. And I started counting the attacks, and you can literally see it going up, up, up in the last couple of months at the same time as they went after Venezuela and went after Iran. So, it became very clear that this is all about oil. And, like you said, whether it's decline or not, I mean, I guess you could say they're doing it out of desperation, but they're succeeding at it, unfortunately. And, that's what makes me hesitate to say that they're like certainly done, right? You could say maybe they've slowed the decline down. I think that would be maybe the most accurate thing, because there was this effort with BRICS to switch to different payment systems and banking systems. But what the US are doing now, in my opinion, is they saw what's going on after Ukraine. Russia pivoted east and started like selling oil and gas to Asia. And so they're literally trying to stop that now. This is their response. They want to block trade between global South countries. And if you look at Iran, Venezuela, Russia, these are 1/3 of China's oil supply. You add them up, Russia's 17%, Iran is 11%, Venezuela's 4%. And they're also crucial for the teapot refinery. So, this is a national security threat. If I were the Chinese, I would literally feel that this is an act of war. And I think it's accurate to describe it like that. So, yeah, it's a lot of things going on at the same time, but I do not look at it as one war in Iran. It's really a concerted imperialist effort to control oil, control trade, and if you will, redraw the trade routes on the planet.
I think one of the problems people have in making these connections is about Trump himself and his persona. So he comes into office saying, I'm going to make Canada the 51st state. And it just sounds crazy and stupid. I'm going to take Greenland. We need Greenland. And so, unfortunately, I think people dismiss these important things or don't see these connections because they're focusing on Trump, the person, and his delivery and things that he says. And therefore, we miss the things that you have been discussing. Do you think that's an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not even trying to say that Trump is some kind of strategist. I really don't think he is particularly bright, but it's exactly what you just described. It's because people perceive him as not being bright that they just discard or disregard these things as kind of just being bravado. And they are obviously bravado, like to a large extent, but they're true at the same time. And when he talks about Canada is linked to all of this. It's just that Canada is not just important like Greenland because you can get ships past the trade routes there in the Arctic. It's also because Canada supplies oil. So, it's very important for the US own energy. I don't like to use the word security because it's really not security at all. It's like it's predatory. So you could say maybe energy dominance or whatever. But yeah, that's why he wants Canada. And he doesn't always explain why, but he's left all these clues. That's one of them. Like, I want Greenland, I want Canada. And then he talks about the too many ships being there. Well, what ships are they? They're usually the Arctic is open like half the year, and even when it's open during summer, it's very hard to get ships through. But he's basically referring to the trade, and it's explicitly mentioned in the UK Arctic brief, so it's very obviously connected. And in the UK brief, they mentioned we're here to support the US. So it's all connected. It's very, very explicit what's going on. But like you said, this problem is they disregard what Trump is saying, and it's not even a strategy from this administration. Like I recall, I had this like faint memory of meetings between Dick Cheney and oil, something like that. And so I went back and I started digging, and the White House, this is in 2001. So this is right after Dick Cheney becomes vice president with Bush as president. And he held like at least 40 that we know of, secret meetings with all of the executives of big oil. So like, Shell, BP, Chevron, all of them, literally all of them. And it's Dick Cheney, his aides, and these Wall Street types sitting in a room and writing the national energy policy, which is scandalous because that's literally a government policy blueprint. They're not supposed to be that overtly involved, or ideally not at all involved. But that's why the White House fought to the Supreme Court from 2001 to 2007 to try and hide these meetings. So it's a really big scandal. And that document, the National Energy Policy, I went through it, and it becomes very, very clear that this is extremely well studied, and they make the pillar of the whole thing the Western Hemisphere. And then I was like, oh, Trump keeps talking about the bloody Western Hemisphere. This all makes sense now. So they, in the document, they're saying they don't want to depend on foreign oil imports, right? So what that means, the way that Trump and this gang interpret it is that, it's not like, well, we should switch to nuclear energy or some different fuel source. It's instead of making the import itself come from an adversarial state, we'll literally just topple the government and take the oil. So, I mean, it's very similar to Bush, but the difference between the Dick Cheney and Bush administration and this one is that back then the US literally needed the oil. They actually needed it because they couldn't produce enough. Now the US can produce enough, but they just want the dominance of being the #1 supplier so they can control others' economies. That's the idea. But it's really, for me, it's clear this is rooted in Dick Cheney and George Bush and the neoconservatives, of course, and their whole foreign policy. And it's Wesley Clark. It was General Wesley Clark who literally gave us the list of nations, the 7 countries of which Iran and Syria are a part. So, this is very, very clear to me that this has been in the work for decades. Condoleezza Rice, there's that famous clip where she says that, you want American energy in Europe. You don't want Russian pipelines, which is kind of like a, foreshadowing of the sabotage of Nord Stream. And she was on the board of Chevron for 10 years. They even named a tanker after her, the SS Condoleezza Rice. So you have Condoleezza Rice, who comes from big oil, Dick Cheney from Halliburton, also big oil, and George Bush, his whole family are from big oil in Texas. So that whole administration were literally big oil, and they invaded Iraq for oil, and they laid out the blueprint, and they laid the groundwork for everything we're seeing today. That's why the U.S. are attacking 3 oil-rich and gas-rich nations, right? Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. This is no coincidence.
I was thinking about what you just mentioned, this continuity, regardless of who's in office. And here in the United States, we're told we have to vote. And I'm not saying don't vote, but there are certain issues, foreign policy issues, where you don't see difference. You may see some differences, but this attacking Russia through Ukraine, this has been going on since the fall of the Soviet Union. We saw during the Obama administration, the U.S.-led coup against the Ukrainian government. So we see, and Obama starts the attack on Syria, but then that goes through Trump, and then it goes through Biden, and Biden is the one who succeeds in 2014. So the U.S. is very meticulous, and I get the feeling that the only country that's really aggressive about asserting its interests is the U.S. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I came to the realization. I kind of knew this for a while, but it's become more apparent. Let's put it that way. That the people that need to be assertive about their security and their national interests are not doing it enough. That when I say that, I mean the global South. They're literally under attack the whole time, from the UK, from the US, from France, in a million different ways, covert and overt. And they don't assert their security enough. And when they do, we call them authoritarian and all sorts of nonsense. And then those that have no threats whatsoever against them, that have no need to go, cross oceans and start wars in the name of real defense, they're doing it all the time, right? That's the West. No one is threatening the West. No one even wants to threaten the West. There is literally nothing, especially the US, which is shielded between 2 oceans, has that geographical advantage. There's literally no need to do any of these wars. So there is an asymmetrical application of force here. And yeah, those that need to be doing it, like Russia, like China, like Iran, who have all been attacked. I mean, again, I consider this cutting off the oil and the LNG. By the way, Qatar, they supply 20 to 30% of China's LNG. that would be a national security threat for me. I would not be hosting the US if I were them. I think they need to abandon. And again, I say this very, very reluctantly. I'm not saying to abandon international law, but I think they need to abandon the premise of like we have to always play by the rules and expect everyone else to play by the rules. Because yes, they have the moral high ground. They have the legal high ground. Like I'm absolutely not saying the opposite. They really do. It's a different culture, a different mindset, and so on. But if they keep doing this, I'm afraid they're going to be wiped out because, the West, you can go and look back, in the time of the Crusades, like they literally walk to another continent to wage war if they have to. There's no stopping it. So, when we talk about defense and force and these things, the global South, they're not doing it enough, like to the point that they might be wiped out. And this is really, really problematic. By the time you get something together, whether we're talking about long-term projects like Belt and Road Initiative or BRICS, you might not even exist anymore because the West is not going to stop. They're going to keep going and keep going. And just to give another example of how serious this is, the United States is cannibalizing its own allies. What do you think it's going to do to countries it considers adversarial, right? So it's really a problem. And I don't see any of this declining. There's always an appetite for war. I mean, literally last year, I was in, I went to the Netherlands during the NATO summit, and you could see all of these like insane dystopian 1984 police vans driving by with like cameras sticking out the top 360. They expanded the budget of all their member states, so they raised it from 2.5% of the GDP to 5%. So my point is that there's always going to be this appetite for war from the West, not just with rhetoric, but also physically, materially. And the Arctic that we just talked about, I can see it so clearly. This is the next battlefield of the future, and that does regard China. That does affect Russia, because Russia, most of their coastline, so that's 53% of the Arctic coastline, is Russian. It's not a NATO member states or someone else's. And they are already laying the groundwork for wars that we haven't even thought about, over water, over gas, in regions that people don't even think about. You can go and look at CNN's website right now and see them reporting from Alaska with the US Army and showing off their new drones. And I literally saw the other day while I was doing this investigation, the other week, how Southcom, which led the invasion, the attack on Venezuela, are adding new drones, right? They've got new underwater drones. They've got new helicopter drones. This is going to get worse, is my point. It's only going to get worse. And if the global South don't stand up for themselves, I'm afraid they'll be wiped out.
And it seems to me that the countries that have the power, China and Russia, I'll just name them. Let's talk about this Board of Peace in Gaza, which, and I did not realize had anything to do with energy, but I thought it was bad enough that China and Russia, neither China nor Russia, dared to veto the UN Security Council resolution, and in effect gave whatever their other words they said, in effect, they gave a blessing to this US-Israeli genocide. But it turns out there is an energy component to this Board of Peace. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this Board of Peace, again, the timeline, once you look at it, you can't unsee it anymore. So the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, which Israel never abides by, was imposed in October 2025. So literally the next month, that UN Security Council resolution 2803 legalizes the Board of Peace. It gives the Board of Peace a legal mandate to take charge of Gaza, which is, again, it's like I thought we were living, through another, like we went back in time to the League of Nations and we're watching a mandate being passed. That's what it felt like, because it really is like a colonial mandate. And it's not even colonial. It's more like corporate is perhaps the right word. It's corporate / colonial because it's run by Jared Kushner and Donald Trump, etc. And you're absolutely right. Legally, in the 4 pages, there is no mention of energy, which I already found suspicious enough because we're talking about a Middle Eastern country. Of course, there's oil and gas there, right? So I already found that suspicious. They just meant to mention water, right? And then a month later, there's a gas deal signed with Israel and Chevron. It's worth $35 billion. And you have to understand that Chevron are the only people that operate in this area. And that plan with the so-called ceasefire it doesn't remove the blockade that Israel imposed on Gaza since 2007 with Egypt. So no one is addressing this gas that exists in the Gaza Marine. That's why it's suspicious. And then suddenly there's a new gas deal with Israel, which controls the Palestinians' gas. So this was already suspicious. And then you had the Board of Peace Summit, the first one, on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum. And you can see in the room, they had these like corporate ads for New Gaza on the wall everywhere. And there's literally oil and gas rigs on the advert. So they didn't mention it in the UN Security Council resolution because they didn't want to make it look suspicious. And it was already very suspicious. But then they once they got it through, they had the legal cover. And, as you said, China and Russia, unfortunately, allowed that through. I don't know why. Once they got the legal cover, then suddenly they're very proudly signing gas deals and advertising very openly that there's going to be oil and gas sucked out of Gaza, right? I mean, you have to be a lunatic to think that Israelis are going to let the Palestinians see 1 cent of that gas. It's very clear what's going on. It's theft. And then immediately they sign a gas deal with Syria. So that's another regime change project / genocide / imperialist conquest that they succeeded with recently. And then it became very clear. And actually, since I published the investigation, they've gone on and signed even more gas deals. One was with Malta, with Libya. That's another victim of the West. And so you got 6 deals in 6 months, right at the same time. So you've got Chevron running in parallel to these military campaigns, military operations in Iran, Venezuela, the Arctic. Very clear what's going on. Very, very clear. It's a blitzkrieg. It's an energy blitzkrieg that they're running. And I can't for the life of me explain why Russia and China allowed that through. I just don't get it. And that's actually something that I purposely left out of the whole investigation and the analysis because, you can't explain why are China letting the US mess with their energy supply? Why are Russia not responding to these hundreds of attacks on their oil tankers, their oil export hubs, their refineries? What is going on? So I left that open to the reader to go and find out. And also my honest opinion about that is because I think they just, the West is just loves violence, right? And they don't let anyone mess with their sovereignty. And I think the global South, and you can see this across various cultures, they're morally and religiously right, but when it comes to defending themselves, they don't have the same appetite for war. And this is more of a philosophical discussion. I think it goes back to the fact that Europe has no resources, so people in the West kind of developed into just like going out and killing and colonizing and stealing as a mode of survival, although it doesn't excuse it. But I think that is the geographical / historical motivator for that. So people in the global South have an abundance of resources. They're not lunatics, and they don't like war for good reason, right? So I think that's kind of the philosophical reason behind it. But politically speaking, I mean, you're a country with nuclear weapons like Russia or China. I can't explain why you are letting the United States bomb your refineries. The United States would never let anyone bomb a refinery or even plan to bomb a refinery. They would nuke that country. And that's how you maintain your sovereignty. That's exactly how you do it. And, Russia, China have nuclear weapons. They're not defenseless countries. They have resources. So I don't know what's going on. I really don't. But, the United States, they are on a mission right now, not just to take oil and gas for them to use. They're really moving the energy corridor. I think that's going to be the main strategic outcome. Is the Middle East is it's gone. From now on, you're going to go and get your gas and oil from the Gulf of Mexico. That's already happening. It's already happening. You've got exports that are up 175% in gas to Asia. American oil and gas companies right now, they're at their maximum highest record profits in history. Really think about that. How these people live for money right now is the most profitable period they have ever had. Their share valuations are also at their highest in history. And the exports to both Asia and Europe are at their highest in history. They're going to cannibalize Europe and Asia. That's what's happening. And then, all the companies that can't afford this energy will die out. And many did since Ukraine, by the way. The French glass industry, the German steel industry collapsed because of Ukraine, and the US becoming #1 in LNG. And now they're really just building on that. So the United States are blowing up the planet to have business redirected to the Gulf of Mexico. That's what's going on. Strategically, from their point of view, there's no cost that is too high for this objective. Like from a realpolitik point of view, establishing energy dominance over the planet is worth being humiliated in Iran. It's worth risking a conflict with Russia and China. It's worth it for them. And until Russia and China step in, I don't think anyone is going to stop them. That's what's so crazy about all this.
Yeah, they see it as existential, and other countries don't seem to, or Russia is trapped in Ukraine right now. So Russia couldn't help Syria when the final coup, and it was a coup, engineered by the US, finally took place. So you have Russia bogged down in Ukraine for 4 years now. So they have a problem. I think that China does not want to be involved in military conflict. They just don't. But they've got to figure out something else, because I think you are correct that the West will control the whole world. The idea of they are on every front attacking multipolarity, attacking the BRICS, not even giving them a chance to de-dollarize. In fact, you're referring not just to the petrodollar, but the petro LNG. Tell me what that is.
Yeah. People talk about the petrodollar and they associate it with Saudi Arabia, and traditionally that was true. But precisely because now the United States have moved the energy corridor to the Gulf of Mexico, and they, by blowing up Nord Stream and sanctioning Russia, by getting Europe, the EU, to sanction Russia, and doing what Condoleezza Rice effectively laid out, right? Like, that was almost prophetic. Well, it's not really prophetic if you plan it. She kind of gave the game away. But by destroying Russian energy in Europe, the US stepped in and they took over the market. Like right now, my energy bill is triple since Ukraine, and it has never gone down. It just keeps going up. The US are the number one supplier of oil, coal, and LNG, right? People often just think of the gas, but it's also coal and oil. And that's all in the last years, right? It's all since Ukraine. So they're making an absolute killing. And that's why I called it the LNG dollar, because the US became, because of Ukraine, the number one exporter of liquefied natural gas. And right now, when you destroy the Qatari gas field, the US are basically going to step in and take over Qatar's share in terms of their global position and also in Europe, right? So that's why I called it the LNG dollar, because really the revolution, if you will, in the last couple of years, and how America established that position with global dominance, is mainly LNG. But I combined them, and I also called it the Petrogas-Dollar. But I mean, both kind of capture the same idea. And what makes the Petrogas-Dollar so dangerous is that it's not even rooted in the Middle East. The US have always had the geographical advantage of being between two oceans, right? So it's very difficult to attack. It's isolated. And ironically, that's what makes American gas so awful, because it's so far away that to deliver it, the fees cost a fortune. And so some lunatic or these group of lunatics found a way to weaponize that against the planet. So they just figured out, well, if we blow up everyone else's gas and everyone else's pipelines, they have no choice but to buy American gas. And that's literally what's going on. So they found a way to move the dollar, from being anchored in the Middle East to the Gulf of Mexico. So you have both the U.S. industrial base, Washington, D.C., the political capital, and the whole anchor of the U.S. currency shielded all the way between two oceans. I mean, for me, that's the opposite of a decline. It's not something like I take pleasure in saying. I'm kind of saying it. I'm kind of like doing this whole investigation as a warning, like, look what's going on. Wake up, right? That's the whole point. But people just don't want to see it. And when it comes to BRICS, they're not even getting them a chance to stand on their own two feet. That's absolutely correct. I think if things continue on the present course, when people look back at this moment, they're going to see this as a failure of BRICS, of the global South, to rise to the challenge militarily, economically. You can't have trade and de-dollarize if you keep getting struck. Your cargo keeps getting stolen, or pirated or blown up. This is impossible. And as a matter of fact, it will weaken that currency even. So, the United States, they're not undefeatable. They're not, omnipotent. They can be defeated. And I'm not like calling for war or something. On the contrary, but the thing is that China and Russia have the means to do this. They have to rise to the challenge, as do the rest of the global South. And we've seen Syria fall. We've seen Venezuela fall, and there's a risk that Cuba could be next. It's not a problem that's going away. That's kind of my point. And the dollar is only going to get stronger. And what's astonishing to me is how in Europe, the politicians in the EU, if I didn't know any better, I would say they work for the CIA, because all they do is literally serve U.S. corporate interests at the expense of Europe.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the CIA has groomed these people, this generation of leaders. So I think you're absolutely correct. When I opened, I talked about the legal or extra legal lawfare, I'm going to call it, attacks against you in the UK and then in Austria. Where do you stand with these cases?
Well, I'm still under investigation. But what the UK did is they closed it, but I put that in quotation marks because they only closed it by giving my file to Austria. Like they apparently I don't even know what that means. Like, I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't know what information that means. But because the UK has better signals intelligence and is a spy hub way more than Austria is, even though it's like a spy den. They have more technical capabilities. So I'm guessing the UK have been surveying me, like electronically and otherwise, and they kind of gave that to the Austrians. And it's very, very insidious, because they're not even the same accusation. The one in Austria is even more ridiculous. Like, they're saying I'm a member of the military wing in Hamas. I mean, it's just like, it's beyond comical at this point, So they're supplying intelligence. My own country is supplying intelligence to my host country in a case that is completely different, but also basically fundamentally the same. It's about criminalizing journalism. Like, they're trying to hold me accountable for commenting on third-party source material, which basically criminalizes academia. But yeah, so now I've been under investigation for over a year in Austria. They haven't returned a single device, yeah, I'm guessing the next time I go back to the UK, there'll be the goon squad waiting for me at the airport. But yeah, that's where everything stands now.
Well, I'm very happy that you have not let that stop you. And before we go, tell our listeners how they can find out about all your work.
Yes, so youtube.com/Richard Medhurst and patreon.com/Richard Medhurst, or on Twitter, just type Richard Medhurst. You'll find my account.
Well, thank you so much. And so that was Richard Medhurst discussing his investigations of the U.S. I'll just read the title: The Petrogas-Dollar, the Secret U.S. Strategy Behind the Iran War. And I guess I should add, and other wars. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. It's a pleasure.